So welcome everyone to Communication and Media Studies Career Day. Today is a collaboration between the Career Center and the Communication and Media Studies Department. My name's Danielle and I'm an Associate Director in the Career Center here at St. Joe's. And throughout the day today, we've invited alumni to join us for conversations about their careers in order to give you guys insight into different career paths, industries, and to get advice on how to enter and thrive in these fields. So all of the sessions are recorded in case you missed any of them today. And our guest for this session is Bianca Facchinei. Welcome, Bianca.
Hi.
Bianca graduated from St. Joe's with a bachelor's degree in English in 2013 and currently works as a national correspondent for Scribbs News in the Washington Bureau covering the economy. Bianca joined Scribbs News in April 2018, so working there for a few years. So again, welcome, Bianca. We're excited to invite you back to Hawk Hill. All right, so today I have a list of questions I'm going to be asking you, followed by 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A from our listeners. So audience, as we're going along, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and then at the end of the session, we'll address them. So let's get started. So we're going to start with a series of career focused questions. So Bianca, can you start with just describing your current role, your core responsibilities, and what a typical day or week looks like for you?
Yes. So I'm a national correspondent for Scribbs News in our DC bureau. For anyone that isn't familiar with Scribbs News, we are a cable channel that's based in Atlanta, but have offices, across the country. And we also own a lot of local TV stations, that, some of you may have, seen growing up, depending on what market you lived in. But I mainly report on the economy. So today's been a very busy day for me because the Fed announced another interest rate hike. And the past few weeks have been pretty crazy because of the banking sector turmoil that's been going on. But one of the great things about my job and really the place that I work is that I have a boss that allows me to explore other topics as well. I love reporting on the economy, but I report on all sorts of other topics that are of interest to me, whether it's politics or breaking news or mental health. So sometimes it can change. And in terms of what a typical day or week looks like for me, does not totally exist in news. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but you just can't help the way that news unfolds. So you might have your whole week plotted out for stories that you're working on, or you might, have a set schedule, but then things can change in an instant. So for me, every week is different, but I also like that setup. I knew when I was considering career paths when I was younger that I wouldn't thrive, working in the same spot 9 to 5 for the rest of my life. I needed that, needed to have some sort of change throughout. So that's pretty much my day to day.
Yeah, that makes sense with the news being different every day. And it's good to know that about yourself going into your career, whether you like routine or whether you'd like it to be a more dynamic experience.
Mm-hmm.
So when did you know that this was the career path that you wanted to pursue, and what led you to make that decision?
So I really, for me, the one experience that I had that I really realized, okay, I definitely want to pursue this 100% was during an internship that I had at PHL 17, which is right around the corner from campus. As many people know, it's the smallest station in Philly. And this was also my second semester of senior year. So a bit of a late bloomer in that sense. But when I was there and I was interning and finally getting the closest thing to real world experience as a college student, I realized how much I loved it. And I realized it was available or, potential career path that I could take, because up until that point, I'd always been interested in news, like ever since I was really young, like a kid, but I never, I think, really admitted to myself that I wanted to pursue that. And I didn't know anyone in the industry. So it just sort of felt like it was out of reach. But once I had that internship experience, it was so important. And I realized that I could pursue it if I wanted to. So yeah, it was after that semester that I got all of my work that I had done at that point together, and tried to pursue a career in news.
Awesome. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, like you said, it's never too late to get an internship, even if it is the second semester of your senior year. It just helps you decide what you want to do with your life. So that's a great example. What would you say is the typical career path for an entry level associate within your organization?
So it really depends. If you're pursuing something in broadcast news,
Mhm.
there are sort of two routes that you can go. The first would be the more traditional route, which is working your way up through local TV markets. So if you wanted to be a reporter, and this is also true for other roles as well, if you want to be a producer, an editor, a director, you start out small. So your first job out of college would likely not be in the Philly market, for example, which is a really big news market. It's like top 5. It would probably be somewhere, maybe closer to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, or somewhere in the middle of Virginia, or in a small regional area. And then you sort of work your way up to bigger and bigger markets with maybe the hopes of getting to a really big market, like a top 5, Philly, New York, Miami, LA, and so forth. So that's one way to go about it. The other way, which is a bit more unconventional and sort of the path that I took, is starting out in digital media. Maybe you're a reporter or an editor for an online newspaper or some sort of startup, and then sort of working your way into broadcast news by networking, or through other opportunities. I mean, one thing about news in general, whether we're talking broadcast or radio and podcasting or newspapers, is that the internet has really disrupted the entire industry, and it's changed a lot even since I've been in it, and I've only been working for 10 years. In the next 10 years, it's probably going to look a lot different too. So things are changing. You don't exactly have to, pick one route or the other. I don't know if, it's necessarily safer to go the more traditional route, simply because so much is changing. But there are, it's good to know that there are multiple paths, and you don't have to do it exactly one way or the other, because not all of those jobs are going to be available to people that want them.
Mhm. That's a great point. Everyone has different paths that bring them to their end goal. As long as you know what your end goal is, and are kind of networking and trying things along the way, then you can land where you want to be, right? So what do you enjoy the most about your profession? And what's something you wish you could change?
I mean, I've met so many interesting people. I love working in news, and I would encourage anyone that is interested to definitely try it out, because it is unlike any other industry in virtually every way. I've gotten to meet, and I don't even meet I don't mean here, famous or important people. I just mean people from all walks of life,
Mhm.
that all have really interesting and important stories to share. And I think it's a privilege being able to tell their stories and, explain to viewers why certain things matter. Like I was talking earlier about how today the Fed raised interest rates yet again. So you can approach that story by saying, hey, the Fed raised interest rates. It's going to make credit cards more expensive and home loans and auto loans more expensive, the end. Or you can talk to everyday people and demonstrate how this can actually affect people on an individual level. It's so important. So I love just being able to talk to people about things that are going on in their lives. I mean, that's essentially what being a journalist is when you boil it down to the lowest level. But there are also definitely things I wish I could change as well. It is a very oversaturated industry. There are more people that want jobs than there are jobs available, and that's probably for a lot of different reasons. But I was thinking about when I first got into the industry, and when I was approaching graduation and applying to jobs. And one thing that scared me so much was, especially with broadcast news in particular, is that the pay is very low. And I think things have changed a little bit, especially post-pandemic, with, wages being different, across the board, not just for news, but everywhere. But one thing I wish that I could really change is that I wish there was better funding for entry level jobs, because I feel like that shuts a lot of people out from even trying to apply.
Mhm.
And news is always in need of more diversity, in
Mhm.
my view.
Yeah, that's a great point. Is there something that surprised you about the industry or your career in general?
Yeah, a lot, lots of surprises. I would say probably the beat that I'm on right now, covering the economy. If you told me 10 years ago that I'd be covering the Federal Reserve or the banking sector, I would have laughed in your face, because that just did not seem like it was at all a possibility for me, especially because when I decided to pursue news, I was really interested in going to DC, covering politics. And I always just sort of shunned the economy as a topic that I ever wanted to cover. I thought it was boring and dry and, just not for me. But I ended up changing things, obviously. Long story short, at one of my previous jobs, there was a business show. They lost a booking producer, and I had just been hired. So they basically put me into that role temporarily. It was supposed to be temporary, and it did not stay that way, but it was a great learning experience for me. I learned so much, and I was able to use that expertise when I applied for other jobs. And it's gotten me to where I am today. So that's definitely the biggest shock. 'Cause I would have never thought that I'd be covering what I am covering right now. But it also just goes to show to, don't be afraid to try new things in your
Mhm.
career. If you end up trying something and you hate it, that's okay. You don't have to keep doing it. You might like it though, and it might help you and be a real opportunity for growth.
Right. Take the chance when the opportunity presents itself, because you never know, what can happen.
Yeah.
Um, so I'd like to switch gears real quick and focus on actions that students can take while they're in school. And real quick, I just want to remind everybody to post questions as you have them to the chat, and then we'll get to them at the end of the session. Um, so we'll cover internships in a second, but for now, what 2 to 3 experiences would you suggest that students engage in while they're in college to help them prepare for this field upon graduation?
Well, first and foremost, internships for sure. I'm
Mhm.
sure I don't have to tell anyone on this call about the importance of internships. It's probably been drilled into your heads already. But they are so important because it's the closest thing you'll really get to real world experience. And depending on what type of internship you have, it can provide, it's a chance for you to build up like a portfolio of work. So that way, when you go to apply for jobs, you can show them what you've done outside of just, what you've done in your classes. And it's a great way, of course, to network too and start making connections in the industry. But one thing I wish that I realized when I was in school, especially because applying for internships can be competitive, is that there are other things as well. Like I was very grateful to get that internship at PHL because that was the only one that I was offered. I had interviewed at NBC 10, I had interviewed at ABC 6, and they just didn't have anything else for me at the time. And I was so heartbroken. I thought, I just wasn't good enough, which really wasn't the reality. It was just simply that even the internships are competitive. They don't have space for everyone. And if it doesn't work out there, you just have to go somewhere else. So I eventually got to PHL, and that was great. But even before that, one of the things that I did when I was at school was, I worked for the school newspaper, which was a great opportunity to learn, and really hone your skill, and also figure out what you like to do. Because you might, when you're in college and even after graduation, you might think you're really interested in one particular role, but then you eventually realize your desire is to do something, be in a totally different role or something. So it's good to try these things out.
Mhm.
um, so definitely take advantage of, the school newspaper. I don't know if there's a school radio station still, or maybe it's podcasts now. I'm
Think
not
so,
totally
yeah.
sure what uh, mediums there are at St. Joe's, but any sort of opportunity where you can practice is good. And another great thing about, pitching stories to the school newspaper, even if you don't want to work at a newspaper post graduation, like maybe you really want to get into broadcast news, it's still really valuable experience. And the great thing about it is that the types of stories you can cover are a little less limited. So if you are going to intern at NBC 10, you're not going to be pitching stories to the news director that's going to, put your story on air. You're going to be there to assist a reporter in the field, or maybe you'll help out an anchor before a newscast. You're not going to be like doing your own stuff. And that doesn't mean that it's not important. It's great experience. But if you're pitching a story to the school newspaper, no one's stopping you from going into Philly and covering a big protest or something. You know what I mean? Like you can cover more of what you're interested in, or things that you really are interested in pursuing. So definitely take advantage of those opportunities. And just remember that there are resources on campus for you. I know when I realized I wanted to pursue a career in news, I felt like, that there, at the time, at least, this was of course 10 years ago, the communications program was pretty small and it was pretty new. So I just had a very bad attitude about it, comparing St. Joe's to, the resources that kids at Temple or like Villanova would have, because their broadcast programs are so big. But there are still resources at St. Joe's on campus that you can use to help you, whether it's the Career Center, helping you make your resume look the best it can be, or just talking to your professors, going to their office hours and asking them for help and advice. If they can help you with the specific job you're looking to do, they might know someone else that they can connect you with. So really just trying to utilize every single resource on campus while you can, because those 4 years go by very quickly.
You definitely do. I have a sidebar question. With being in broadcast journalism, obviously public speaking is a skill that you would need to have, but how important are your writing skills in this sort of a role as well?
So writing is everything.
Mhm.
It really is an art that you need to, you get better at over time for sure. If I took a look at a script that I wrote even 5 years ago, I'd probably cringe. So it's something that you continue to improve upon. But yeah, I mean, being a good writer, and it's different, right? Because when you're writing a newspaper article, for example, the format's going to be very different than a broadcast script. Broadcast scripts are short and to the point. The less, the better almost, because the longer your sentence is, the faster the viewer is going to tune you out and get bored, because all of our attention spans are no longer than like 3 seconds. But being a good writer to work in broadcast news is really, really important. So that's a really key skill to have if you want to pursue news.
Yeah, and it kind of ties together what you were saying about the newspaper
Mhm.
and pitching stories and all of
Yep.
that. So thank you for answering that.
Yeah.
Um, I know you talked about PHL 17. Can you talk about how you got that job, and then maybe how you got your first job post graduation?
Yes. So I think with PHL, it was very simply just like I saw an opening maybe on the website and I applied and it ended up working out. I think the reason I probably had a better shot there was because it was a smaller network, which is, something to consider when you're thinking about where you want to intern. I know I really had high hopes to end up at like NBC and it didn't work out and I was sad. But PHL was so great for me because even though it was smaller, that meant I got way more hands-on experience. There at the time, I think there was one anchor and like 2 reporters there. So everyone needed help, which meant that I had so many opportunities to go out in the field or help in the control room or go edit a package with one of the editors and photographers. There were so many more chances for me to really learn. And then also, by the end of that experience, really have a ton of work to show what I did. Not that I wouldn't have had the same experience at NBC, but there's a bit more of a hierarchy there because it's a bigger network. There's it would have been different. And then with my first job, it was a similar scenario. I had applied, I think, on Journalism Jobs, which is one of the big journalism job websites. But again, that was my first job, was at a very small company. It was a startup at the time. It's actually no longer in existence, but I started out small. which again, to go back to the money situation, means that it's probably not going to be, the highest salary you might obtain, but is good for you in terms of, if you can make it work, all of the opportunities you'll get to try different things and really get a lot of work done, and have a lot to show for it after, 6 months to a year.
Makes sense. So I know you probably had to do some interviews for those jobs, and your job now. Can you share one or two interview tips, either from your own perspective or if from the perspective of HR within your organization? What are some lessons that you learned and can share with the students here?
Yeah, of course. So I think the first and foremost, that I definitely learned, throughout my process interviewing is not only to familiarize yourself with the role that the company is looking to fill, but also really with the company itself. So if I was going to apply, for example, as a reporter at ABC on City Ave, I would want to go and tell them all the reasons why they should hire me, because look at all of my experience reporting. These are all the stories that I've done. I have the skills. But I would also want to prove to the news director, whoever is hiring, that I also really understand, the local ABC channel in Philly. And, here are some stories I would pitch if I was in the editorial meeting today. Here are things that your viewers in Philly really should know about. And this is why. So don't just focus so much on the role, but also, try and learn about the company that you are applying for and try to make a connection as to, why it makes sense for the company to invest in you by hiring you and bringing you on. And then the other main thing I would say is, I know when I was first starting out, I dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome, something I still sometimes deal with today. For anyone that is unfamiliar with that concept, it's this idea that you just are not good enough, or you don't have the qualifications to be where you are. And it, just causes you to be really insecure. And it's normal to an extent to feel that way, especially when you're first starting out and your whole resume is just full of internships and no professional experience. But I will say, if there's a job that you're applying for and you get an interview and you're really excited about it because this is a place that you would love to work, just to try imagining yourself getting the job. So that way, when you go into the interview, you are excited instead of really nervous, because people that are interviewing you are going to pick up on your energy. So it's just like a way to sort of trick your mind to not get too worked up and overwhelmed before you interview.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I think that there's definitely a lot of that imposter syndrome, and it doesn't go away right away. And any tips to handle that, I think, are great for students to hear. So switching gears slightly, your SJU education included keystones in social justice and ethics. How has that impacted the work that you do and the career decisions that you've made?
I mean, it's meant a lot to my career, and in so many positive ways. I mean, and not just the education aspect as well. I mean, obviously everyone has to, I'm assuming there are still, those core courses that you need to take regardless of what your major is. And in those courses, there are all sorts of ethical debates about every hot topic, which is a great start for anyone that is interested in covering anything that's currently going on in the world. But one thing that I did at St. Joe's a lot was volunteer. And I mean, I still volunteer, mainly because I think if you can help people, you should, like, as reason number one. But in addition to getting the chance to, volunteer with whatever organization it is, there can be, it's a learning experience for us, right? So like when I was in college, one of the things that I did was tutor inmates when I was a junior. And then I ended up actually taking a course, I think it was my junior year, maybe it was senior year, with Father Brennan and I think Sister Lenahan, about, it was like an English and a philosophy combined course, and it was taught in prison with inmates that had some sort of college credits and they were trying to get their degree. So it was a course that it was made available to them.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I've covered in my career is mass incarceration and, the rise in imprisonment across the country, and how that compares to other nations and the impacts it can have on our society, particularly for minorities. So it was really crucial for me to have that experience myself. Not everyone, I don't have any colleagues that had that experience and could use that to their advantage. And I think that sort of applies to everything, whether you're doing Relay for Life and helping out cancer survivors, or you are volunteering at a homeless shelter. These are things that really can help open your eyes to the world, because in news, you will be not only interviewing and talking to people from all walks of life, you will be, putting together a newscast for all sorts of viewers, that come from different backgrounds in different parts of the country. Maybe they're from other parts of the world. And so that diversity is really important, and it's important not to, be stuck in a bubble. And I don't think I never felt like I was stuck in a bubble at St. Joe's because of those experiences.
Yeah, it's so true. That's such a core aspect of what we do here. And right, like in any job, really, you don't know how your life experience will really play into that. So that's super interesting how that related back to your career in news. Um, what types of internships would you suggest that students try to go for to secure, or I'm sorry, to prepare for a role like the one that you have, or one just in your industry in general?
So I would say for anyone that is interested in reporting specifically,
Mhm.
to try getting an internship at a small, like a local TV station. Like, I know I've obviously mentioned PHL a lot already, but because it was small, it meant more experience for me. Not to say that a bigger station wouldn't be as beneficial, because they're all going to be good in their own ways. But if you are interested in pursuing something in broadcast news as a reporter, definitely, try getting an internship at a local station, either in or near, your hometown, or in Philly. And really one thing I would also say, one of the reasons I was afraid to pursue news was because I knew it was very competitive. And I knew that the pay, at least in the beginning, was not really high, to be frank. And unfortunately, the same goes for internships. Most networks do not pay. I think it's messed up, and I think they should pay, but they don't. So for anyone who was like me, who preferred to work in the summer when I was not in school, I would definitely encourage you to look for internships during the semester. That would allow you to, I think one internship is equivalent to like one class. So it would be, you take 4 classes and then you have an internship maybe twice a week. That way you keep your summer open, because if you do get a summer internship, which is still great, you will be working Monday through Friday, 8 hours a day. They don't offer typically part-time in the summer. So that's just one other thing to consider. But I would definitely say pursuing small stations. And if that doesn't work out, it's okay to try other outlets as well, whether it's, a startup local newspaper in the city or a radio station. Those can be very beneficial too. And the industry, regardless of what sort of network or outlet you're at, is small. Everyone knows someone that they might be able to connect you with down the road too. So don't cast a wide net, is basically what I'm saying.
Mhm. Yeah, networking is super important in that process. And kind of going off of that, what do you know much about, internships in the digital landscape too? I know you were talking a little bit about that earlier.
Mhm.
Is that a good place for students to look as well?
I think so. And I mean, again, the internet has been such a major disruptor. So every network has, a digital presence. So it can still be a very valuable skill if you were reporting for, the digital version of the Inquirer or something like that.
Mhm.
And also, you know, a lot of these websites, whether they're newspapers or whether they're sort of like a new media company, a lot of them have video content too, or they always want to have video content. So if you're hired as an intern to help with the breaking news section and they're trying to add more video content to embed in their articles or maybe for their social media pages, it could be a great chance for you to say, okay, well, I spent the summer working at the local paper in my hometown, but look at all this cool video that I shot for them. And, you know, I could do that here too. So you can sort of make it work, I think, wherever you go, especially in digital media though, because it's always changing and evolving. And ultimately, I think there will always be a place for television news, but I think we can all say that most of us get our news immediately on our phones first, right? So I think it would be a totally legitimate way to make your way in the industry.
Mhm. Thank you. Yeah, it just seems like not what people think of first, but another medium to go through as well.
Yeah.
So we just have a couple final questions. What is something that you wish someone told you when you were in school? Is the first one.
A lot. I wish I knew a lot 10 years ago. But I would say number one thing that I really wish I knew when I was graduating was that it's okay to not have a job by graduation. I did not have a job by the time I graduated. I had, I think, a couple interviews that had been the, you know, in the spring, but nothing panned out before then. And I felt like such a failure, especially because all of my friends and my boyfriend, my husband now, they all had jobs by the time they graduated. Some of them had job offers by like the end of first semester, so they could just like cruise throughout the rest of senior year. It was not the same for me. And I felt like I was already off to a bad start. And it was a sign that I wasn't good enough or I didn't have the right experience and it just wasn't going to work out. But, you know, one thing about news is that regardless of whatever sort of outlet you're pursuing, big or small, you know, big market or small market, is that it's really competitive. And it also works, the news industry, like I was saying earlier, is unlike any other. And that's also true when it comes to hiring. At a newspaper, a television station, a radio station, they rarely have plans to, you know, hire reporters, you know, 6 months to a year out where they can say, all right, we want to hire 10 people by this date. You know, it's so different. So like, don't worry about comparing to your friends that are graduating from the business school and already have jobs at like an accounting firm. It's totally different and you can't even compare. But yeah, I mean, I would say that's probably the main thing. And I also really just did not realize how competitive it was going to be. When I started applying, I probably, before I got my first job, which didn't come until a couple months after graduation, I probably applied to like hundreds of jobs, maybe not many over 100, but it was more than like what most of my friends in other industries had applied for before they got a job. So I felt like I was failing because I was applying all these places and most of them didn't even get back to me. Like out of all of the jobs that I applied for, maybe 5 to 10% even like acknowledged me in a response, let alone led to an interview. So don't let that discourage you. Just know going into it that your experience trying to get a job in news is going to be very different than your friend in the food marketing program.
Yeah, that's great insight and advice. The last question was if you have any advice for students. So if there's anything final you'd like to leave with them before we get into the Q&A part of the session, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say to when you are applying to jobs and when you get your first job, to always be willing to sort of help out, even if it's not a responsibility or it's not like a specific part of your role. You know, try and do what you can and look at every opportunity as a chance to grow and learn, because When you start out, especially if you're someone that is interested in being a reporter specifically, your first job out of school is not going to be your dream job. And that's not how it works for anyone. Like, if someone graduates from the business school with a finance degree, their first job is not going to be the CEO of a major investment bank. So like it's across the board everywhere, but with news, especially, your first job might be covering a beat that you don't really have much of an interest in. And then that's especially true if you start out at a really small local station. The stories that you're assigned might be a local house fire, or it might be, something like a new car dealership opens in town. Like it's not going to be breaking news that is going to affect the entire world, but it's still a chance to learn and to grow. And if you just have that mindset, it'll be much easier to get through some of those tougher times in the beginning because it's competitive, and it's not, like I said, it's not going to be your dream job at first. So you just have to take what you have and really make it what you want. So that way it helps you move on to the next phase.
Mm-hmm. That's great perspective. It's all about how you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, no one gets their dream job right away. And if you don't get your job right when you're leaving college, it's not the end of the world. Things will work out. So thank you so much, Bianca. This has been great. And I want to now open it up for the students to ask questions. So if anyone feels comfortable using the raise your hand feature, go ahead and do that. And I'll just call on you, or you can throw your question in the chat. But I'll just give you guys a minute if you have anything.
I have a question as people are thinking. Bianca, thank you so much. So you mentioned that you do have the opportunity to do some remote work, and I'm just wondering sort of what is it like post-COVID? Was there always remote work? Is there, is it more, likely now? And how students who are starting off, if it is a lot of remote work, how do they get over that sort of barrier there if you're not bumping into people or, having FaceTime with folks? How do you get through that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So remote work before COVID was definitely part of the industry already, but really felt like it was only available to select few people. So for example, like at major television networks, at CNN, at Fox, at MSNBC, some of the main primetime anchors there have home studios, so they can broadcast from home when they want to because they don't want to go into the city. And if you work at the New York Times, or you have a role as, whether it's a reporter or you're like a big opinion editor, people can work remotely simply because of the internet. You don't have to be in an office to write and then send in a first draft to whoever's editing your piece. It just wasn't common, and it was sort of looked down upon, just like it was in every other industry. Working from home means you're not really working, so we want everyone here in the bureau, in the studio, whatever. Post COVID now, I can definitely tell you that, with the exception of my colleagues that report on the Hill and on the White House, me, my one colleague, Sasha, who's our national security correspondent, we're always live in the studio. But before this call started, we're talking about how I'm 8.5 months pregnant. So I've been home and I've been reporting from home because my bosses are, trying to accommodate for that. So now, even though it's encouraged to be back into the studio, if you're not in the field, it's definitely considered, a totally reasonable option to work remotely, as long as you have the resources to do that, which I think is great. Because even for me, even if I lived in DC and I wasn't a commuter based in Maryland, there are plenty of days where I can work and get a ton of work done at home, and I don't need to be in the office. But to go back to the other part of your question, being in a newsroom was definitely a really crucial part of my development in the beginning of my career. And I don't know for sure, but I would be surprised if any network, was going to hire someone that was entry level and had them remote, like full-time or even part-time, simply because being in the newsroom is so important to understanding how the whole operation works. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the silver linings of COVID for sure has been allowing us all to have that flexibility, because there isn't always a reason to be in unless you absolutely have to be.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
That was a great question. We have another one here from Juliet. She wants to know, do you know how competitive the jobs are behind the camera at news stations, such as camera operators, editors, etc.?
So yeah, I mean, listen, I would say virtually every position is competitive. I don't think it's as competitive as the reporter and anchor jobs, though. So if that's something you're interested in pursuing, whether it's directing or editing or being a videographer, those are, it's still good to do as much networking as you can, and, trying to get that internship experience for the same reason. But, competitive just in a different way. All of those jobs are very highly sought after, but it's not, once you get to a certain level, trying to get a job as a director is very different than trying to get a job as an anchor. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Bianca? Feel free to raise your hand or throw it into the chat.
A question I did have was, how well do you think St. Joe's kind of prepped you, like the communications department? I know you kind of had like a set major, but did you ever feel like you wanted to switch career paths kind of halfway into it? And how well do you think St. Joe's, like the comm department, prepped you for that?
I mean, it was great preparation. And one of the things that I love about news is that it really doesn't matter what your major is. It's great if you are pursuing a career in news and you have a communications degree or a broadcast journalism degree, even more specific. But you can also get a job in news with a chemistry major. It really doesn't matter. What matters is your experience, which is why things like internships, or working at the school newspaper, or starting a blog or a podcast are so important to have on your resume. You could be competing with a candidate that went to a journalism school and took all of the journalism classes that are offered in their undergrad, but if they don't have that experience and you do, a news director would 100% choose you over the other candidate. So experience is really what matters the most. And yeah, I mean, even though the communications program was is probably so different from what it looks like today, because I know at the time it was a really fast growing major, and that's obviously been 10 years since now. But the professors that I had were great and really helpful. And, another good thing about St. Joe's is that it's a small school. So it's, smaller class size. And if you want to go to your professor's office hours, or, if you, need to seek them out for any sort of advice, they're probably way more approachable and available than if you were to have gone to a bigger school. So I think they prepared me very well.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Bianca, I know you have to get back to work.
Yes.
So please join me in thanking Bianca for her time today. Thank you for providing such great insight into your career. We're grateful for your time, and we hope to see you back here on Hawk Hill sometime soon. Just a reminder, everybody, the session was recorded and it'll be available on YouTube in about a week if you want to view it again or send it to anyone. So have a great day, and thank you again, Bianca.
Yeah, thank you guys. It was great participating.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Everyone.